Hey, what's up guys? Dennis here. Hope you're doing good. I want to do a video for you on changing your front brake pads and your rotors on a 2012 BMW 328i, the F30 chassis. This is the one with the N20 engine. I wanted to do a video because I went through a lot of trouble and spent a lot more money than I needed to because I didn't know a couple of things. So I wanted to do this video since I'm actually changing out the brakes again, and I figured I'd record this and add in all the experiences and some of the tips that are going to help you substantially when you're trying to do this yourself. So a little context so you have an idea of what to avoid and kind of the stuff that I went through, so you have an idea why I'm making this video and be able to take some of the value away from it a little bit better. So I actually changed my brakes about 2.5 months ago. Brakes and rotors, I did everything myself. I went through a lot of trouble, and I wanted to kind of go over a couple of things that actually happened to me. So the reason I'm doing this video is because I'm actually changing them out again, changing out the brake pads for the front of the car only, and because the brakes that I got in the front, about a week after I got them, they started to squeal. They've gotten a lot better over the weeks, but I want absolutely no squeal at all. And really the other very big issue that I have with them is that they throw way too much brake dust. And I'll put a picture so you can see the difference between the back wheel and the front wheel. So the back right now has ceramic brakes, and the front ones are semi-metallic because I couldn't find the ceramic ones at the time. So I went to O'Reilly's, purchased the ceramics for the rear. They didn't have the ceramics for the front, and I just wanted to get the project over with. At that point, I had taken a couple of days messing with it. So I said, okay, I'll get the semi-metallics and hopefully everything's fine. But again, it started to squeal and throw way too much brake dust, and that was a big problem for me. So I ended up having to buy another set of brake pads, and I'll show you which ones I got. But I want to go over some things that you're going to need, just so you have an idea in the case that you don't have them already, and we can go from there. So what you're going to need is a C-clamp, and this is a C-clamp right here. It's actually 4 inches, if you can tell. I wouldn't get anything less than 4 inches because this actually works perfectly fine, but I wouldn't get anything smaller than this if I were you. You could get this for a couple bucks on like a automotive store, Home Depot or something like that. What you're going to need is a Hex Key Set. Some of us already have these at home. I had a set. It didn't work for me, even though I felt like the hex should have fit. I don't know if it's because maybe the measurements are a little bit different than what they use in Europe. But I got these. If you can see them, they're from Kobalt. And I got this at Home Depot for about 20 bucks, and it has like the European and American measurements. So I figured it'd be safer that way. I got it, and it ended up working out really well. The cool thing is, not only does it come with all these hex sets, but you can use them and put them inside of here and use this to kind of like turn things around or put pressure on stuff, and it works really well, and you'll see how I use that later. What you're going to need, of course, are your new brake pads. I'll show you what they look like here. Now I got the Kobalt brake pads, and these are ceramic. So the reason I chose these is because they are ceramic, and the other ones are semi-metallic, so I know I'm not going to have the problem that I had with the ones that are actually currently on the vehicle right now. So this one comes with a brake sensor, which is pretty cool. It also comes with your paste, your brake lube, which is also important as well. And I'll put these here, but you're also going to need, of course, if you don't have this already, if you need to take off the tires, you're going to need a set of sockets. These are impact wrench sockets. I didn't use it with an impact wrench, but this came in very handy. Of course, you need this. And I have the number 17 here. This is what I use to take off the wheels, or the lug nuts, I should say. So it's probably the size that you're going to need, the 17. What you're also going to need is your wheel lock. And I'll get into a quick little story about this. This was a nightmare. So 2.5 months ago when I changed the brakes and the rotors, I was fine. I had the wheel lock, everything was cool. Finished the project, could swear above all things that I had the wheel lock put back into my trunk inside the set. And a week ago when I went to do this video and to swap out the brakes, the front pads, could not find it for anything. So if you have a wheel key that looks like this, it's probably the one from Megard. So that's M-C-G-A-R-D. That's how you spell Megard. So I went through a lot of trouble looking for the actual wheel lock. Could not find it. I ended up ordering on eBay another set, thinking that they would at least be the same wheel lock. You can see how close they are in similarity. Turns out, after waiting a week and spending the money unnecessarily, even though I had the same, I ordered the one with the same manufacturing code here, the patterns are different. Long story short, waited a week, they didn't work. Then I spent a couple of days going to different stores trying to find out how to take them off. Looked on YouTube, they said that you can use a socket, whether a 6-point or a 12-point socket, put it around the wheel lock right here, if you can see it. Let me actually zoom in on that. There you go, focus. And it fit perfectly around it. After you hammer it in, you can take it off. And this is a size 24, by the way. Let me see if I could focus on that. There you go. It's a 24. So, point is, this is not going to work for you if you have a BMW and if you have the Megard wheel locks. And this is what they look like here. So these patterns are not the same on every one. So don't make the mistake of getting another set thinking that they're going to fit, because they look very similar, but they're not the same. So the problem I had was, even though I was able to hammer this in and pretty much get it around the wheel lock, this has a little ring here that I didn't know about. So let me zoom in and focus on this. So this has a ring that actually spins. Didn't know that until I purchased this, tried it, and the whole thing started spinning around. So don't make the mistake if for some reason you go to do this project or a project in the future. If you can't find your wheel lock, don't even bother watching YouTube videos on it. You're not going to figure out how to take this off. You don't need to buy a socket that fits around it. You don't need to buy another set of wheel locks. Just take my advice. Go on the Megard website. It's mcgard.com. Assuming that you have this case right here. You see this card right here? This card has some numbers on it up here. It has some numbers on it, and you're going to call and you're going to give them these numbers. And these come out to 15, or I should say these come out to $15 each. I bought two so I could keep one in the house, and you can avoid yourself all the trouble. So make sure that even if you do have one of these, and you haven't lost it, if you don't have a second one, buy yourself a second one before you ever need it. It's good to keep one inside the house. So just get it. It's $15 each. It comes in a couple of days, and you can save yourself the trouble. I spent days and days looking up stuff on how to take this off. I went to 4 different stores looking for this socket. I went to a tire shop where I was told the guy had a master set of things. He actually didn't have the size that I needed. I don't think it was going to work anyway, but point is, I thought it'd be useful to mention that in this video, since of course you're going to be taking off the wheel. And just know that this spins around and you don't have to bother breaking it and doing all that crazy stuff. Just order it from Megard. And I think if you don't have this card right here, you call them and I think they let you email them your license plate and your registration of your vehicle, as well as a picture of the actual pattern of this little guy right here. If I could get it to zoom, there you go. So that's that. And what's good to have, you don't have to have these, but I would recommend having a set of these just in case. Now this is an adapter set. This is a 1/4 inch and 3/8 inch and 1/2 inch drive adapters, and this is the same as hex drill socket drivers, just in case you don't have specific sizes, you don't go crazy. So if you happen to be in the store, I would grab these. I got these in a Harbor Freight for a couple bucks, so I highly recommend those. A couple things to mention as well. This is the size and the shape of the brake pads you need for this particular vehicle. I want you to also understand, because I learned this as well, that your front brake pads are not the same as your rear brake pad. You can't just get 2 sets of these and call it a day. You can see these are your original ones from BMW that I had on the back of the car. You can see the size and the shape are completely different, right? So before you get into this, if you've never done this before, understand that the brake rotors and the brake pads are different in the front and the rear of your car. So just know that. That's important if you haven't figured that out yet. And I'll put a link in the description as we go further on in the video to the rotors that I purchased and the exact brake pads that I got, both ceramic, so that you don't have to even watch another video, and everything that you need to know is right here in this video, which is why I'm making it. So also, of course, you're going to need a breaker bar to remove your wheels. If you don't have one, purchase one. This is the 1/2 inch drive. This is what I would recommend. The 3 inch drive is smaller than this and it's a weaker bar. I actually broke it when I was swapping out the brakes the first time and trying to take off the wheel. Little side note, if you get this, and these are the ones with the lifetime warranties, if you happen to break it, you can bring it in and get a free one. And you're also going to need brake paste. So you don't need to buy a separate one if you decide to go with the brake pads that I recommend, because again, they do bring their own brake paste. But I actually got this one anyway before I had purchased the new brake pads and realized that they had their own brake paste. So that's a couple of different things. Also to note, if you don't do these yourself, if you don't change out the brakes and rotors yourself, you probably know it's going to cost you a good amount of money. I went to the oil place, the place where I get my oil changed, right by the house. They told me it's going to be $1,100 for aftermarket, including everything. That's sensors, brakes, rotors for the front and back, and labor, and around $1,400 for OEM parts, BMW parts. That sounded like it was a bit too much for me, so I didn't want to spend that because I felt like I was being played. So I decided to figure out how to do it myself, and I would recommend that all of you do it so that you know that it's not that crazy. You become more familiar with the car and you can save yourself all that money. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. Alright, so the first thing that you're going to want to do is remove this plastic component here. This can be removed very, very easily. All you have to do is take this guy off right here, this one right here, and this one right here. What you're going to do is loosen these by turning them, and you can either use like hex keys and put it inside of these and turn them, or you can use pliers, any type of pliers so you can turn them. I prefer pliers, but you can use anything to take that off, and that comes off very, very easily. So the next thing that you're going to do is remove this cap right here. Now this is for your brake oil. You want to take that off and put this cap somewhere that's not in this area so it doesn't fall in there by accident. Put it on the table or something. And what you want to do is remove that cap, because here's where the brake oil goes. So what you're going to do is, we're going to use a C-clamp that I showed you earlier, and we're going to press back the piston, the brake piston, to its normal position so that it's easier to take the brake pads out and insert the new ones back in. What you don't want to do is push that piston back and then the oil come back out and make a mess. So what you want to do is put a rag like this over it. So essentially taking off that cap relieves the pressure off of the brake line, so you can push the brake piston back, and then you put this rag or any rag on top of it, so in the case that the brake oil comes up, it doesn't make a mess and leak on the side of your engine compartment. Okay, so as you can see, these are my rotors. As I mentioned before, these are not the stock ones. These are third-party or aftermarket rotors that I got. These are the PowerStop version. And I'm going to put the link in the description so you know which ones to get, so you don't even have to go shopping around. I recommend these. I have no problem with them. As you can see, they are drilled and slotted, so it allows for better heat dissipation. I don't know if that really helps as far as like with braking power. I haven't noticed any degradation, I would say, in braking power over the original stock ones, and I prefer these. These are actually obviously much prettier when they were brand new. So these at this moment, at the time of this video, have been on here for about 3 months, and so I'm gonna keep these. I'm just gonna change the front pads right now. It's important. I would recommend wearing gloves because all this stuff is coated in dust. So that's just a small little tip before you get started in case you forgot. And what you're going to need is a flathead screwdriver so you can take off the caliper pin. So the way you take that off is by loosening this pin right up here, or this tab I should say. Let's see if we can get this off fairly easily. There you go. There you go. There you go. That's your caliper pin. You can choose to buy a new one. It's like a couple of bucks. And I'll get into the 2 websites that I highly recommend you use whenever you're buying absolutely anything for your car, especially BMWs, because they're so annoyingly complex and specific. But this you can get for a couple bucks if you decide to change this out. And some brake pads that you get will come with a caliper pin, but some don't. In this case, the ones that I got don't. And not a big deal because you could either reuse the old ones, but I guess it's recommended to get a new one. But that's completely up to you. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is take out these caps right here. You can see this one right here. I pulled it out a little bit so you can see it a little bit more easily. So there's one of these right here, and there's another one under, lower on the caliper itself. So what you're going to want to do is take off this cap right here. There you go. And take off the second one on the bottom so that we can expose the 2 hex bolts that go in from the back that go in this way and hold the caliper in place. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is loosen these bolts that are back here that now you've exposed by removing these caps, right? So here's where the hex keys that I mentioned earlier come into play. Now, these may or may not be super tight for you. They were pretty tight for me when I first took them off, but you can use them like this, so you could get one end into it, right? And then you could use this guy right here. You could put this at the other end and use it to turn it. So I've already actually loosened it for the sake of the video, but just to show you the best way to use this, so like that you don't mess up your hands. Or what you can do if it's really tight, instead of pulling all your weight into it, you can go hitting it so that it loosens up, and then it's going to loosen up all the way and then you're good. It's better to do that than and put all your force into it and then maybe this slide off or your hand slide and you know, scratch your arm or something like that with the caliper or something sharp in there. That's the way I recommend it. And then once you're done with that and it's loose, just for speed, then you can switch it over and put the longer end in here and it just goes to turning, right? One thing to keep in mind too, might not come into play too much in this particular case with these bolts, but it definitely will come into play with the other bolts if you're trying to take off the rotor as well, is to remember the direction that you're trying to turn the bolts. So in this case, in any case, the lefty-loosey, righty-tighty does apply, but make sure that you're thinking in your mind, you know, that's only going to work if you're looking at the actual face of the bolt. So since we're not looking at it, it's the opposite way, right? So in this case, we're turning it that way to our right so we can loosen the bolt. So just keep that in mind. Here it's not as bad because these bolts, at least for me, were more loose than the actual caliper bracket bolts, which I'll show you in a little bit. But those are so tight that it makes you wonder, you know, if you're even turning it the right way. That's how tight it was, at least for me. And I'll get into some of the tips that I could give to you so that you can loosen those bolts without killing yourself or spending additional money. So I'll show you what these bolts look like right now once I take this out. Let's see if this guy will come out for me now. Okay, so this is what this bolt looks like. You can see it. Just so you have an idea of where the threads are and how long this is and that sort of stuff. Now this, you could put some lubricant on this if you want, just so it doesn't seize up. It wasn't bad for me, but just, you know, if you're going to, this is a good time to do that, or when you're going to put the bolt back in. But this is how the bolt looks, and as I mentioned before, there's one right below where you just took this one out. It's lower on the bracket. You take that one out, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, now that you've removed those two bolts, the next step is to take off this bracket right here. And just as a note, you don't have to take out the two bolts completely. Just make sure that they're, of course, they're completely unloosened, and you pull them out a little bit because they're surrounded by like this rubber shroud or tubing, and you don't have to take them out completely, but just make sure also on the way back in, when you put them back in, that you go pushing them in as you turn them, because it can get stuck and then you might think that they're tight. They just got tight in a wrong and weird position, kind of angled. So that's important so that you don't drive, you know, in an unsafe manner. So the next step is to take off this bracket right here, the caliper. So what you want to do is, you can see here's one brake pad and here's the other one inside. So what we'll do is we'll take out the one that's in the back. Here you go. That's the brake pad. And you can see how brown it is. That's why it throws so much brake dust. It's pretty terrible. So, but here you can see how it looks. And here's the piston. I don't know if you can see there. You can see the piston back there. So that's what slides in and out to push the brakes against the rotors. And that bracket goes inside the piston to keep everything aligned. So now we'll take this one out here in the front. Get rid of that one. You can see how much life they still have because we've only had them on there for, you know, 2.5 months. So, but the important thing to do next, make sure this doesn't hang on the brake line, because this is pretty heavy. So you don't want it to hang on the brake line. So you could hang it up here. I've seen it hung up here on the springs. I didn't do that last time, and I don't really think you have to. You can turn it like this and let it rest on the rotor, right? And just put it in a way where it's just not going to fall, where you know it's not going to fall. And that's fine right there. There's no weight hanging on this, and this isn't twisted or anything weird. It's sitting there in a very nice, sturdy position, and you're good to go. So one thing I want to mention about the rotors really quickly. So in this video, I'm not going to remove these because I'm leaving these on. These are the new ones, so I'm keeping these on here. So in this video, I'm only changing out the brakes, but if you wanted to go ahead and remove the rotors, there's a couple tips that I have for you. So it was pretty tight on there for me. They did not come off easily at all. It was probably the first time they had ever been changed on this car, so they were on there pretty tight, especially the caliper bolts in the back, the caliper bracket bolts. And you can see these, and I'll show you what they look like in a little bit. But the bolts that hold this bracket here were extremely tight. It was a lot of work. It took me a couple of days in this hot garage overnight messing with this stuff. At one point I even considered then actually taking it somewhere where they could remove the bolts because they were that tight. If you wanted to remove the bracket, what you need to do is remove this little screw right here. Remove the two bolts that are back here, and then if your rotor is not seized on this hub too bad, you may be able to get it out with your hand and pull this towards you and take it off. If not, you have to bang it up a little bit. So quick tip on that. If your rotor does not come off easily, there's of course people use hammers and sledgehammers and that sort of thing to bang it off, to get it off the hub. I think that's a bit much, and honestly at the time I didn't have a hammer heavy enough to knock it out, and I didn't want to buy a $30 hammer to use one time. So what I ended up doing was and it worked really, really well. And I want to mention this in case you are taking off the rotor and you have this issue. What I ended up using was a weight, like a weight plate that you would use in like weightlifting. I use a 10-pound plate, and I just banged it like here, 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 and here. And that was after I poured some WD-40 inside these holes, so that it could kind of infiltrate and lube up the inner parts and that sort of thing. So after I left the WD-40 doing its work for a bit, I took the weight and I had it sideways like this, like a plate, and I hit the top, left, bottom, and right, like repeatedly, and it came off really easily. That's a cheap way to do it. You probably have weights at home. I would imagine it would work with the 5-pound weight. I use a 10-pound weight, and that worked perfectly. And it allows you to be a little bit safer instead of hammering a bunch of stuff. You might hit this lip or something and break that off or bend something. And personally, I don't like kicking or hitting things too hard while the car is on the jack. So if you want to save yourself money and you have if you have a weight at home, 10-pound weight, it would work beautifully because you can control where you hit it. It's safer, and also it doesn't leave damage when you hit it on the flat side. It doesn't leave damage to the rotor itself in the case you want to resurface it or keep it or whatever. So that worked really, really well, and I wanted to include that in this video as a tip if you do have to take off the rotor. But in this particular case, it's not going to be removed. Another thing as well, and I'll show you here if I can find the socket wrench. So as I mentioned before, these brackets were so tight, it took me days to take them off. I spent hours on YouTube figuring out different ways to test to try to get the bolts off that are behind here, because you can't take off the rotor without taking this off. So I used huge wrenches and all this stuff. I even had the socket wrench in here, and I allowed it to, what I actually ended up doing was putting boards out here, and basically putting the socket wrench like this and letting the car go down a little bit so that the weight of the car would turn the wrench. I even bought a second, jack stand, and I put it here and I went lifting it up, and that works really well. But in some cases it doesn't work depending on how much clearance you have and the direction that you have to turn these bolts back here. If you're going to do this with the socket wrench, you get a larger socket wrench. This is obviously not the best ideal one for this. You would get one with the 1/2-inch drive. It's a little longer and it's thicker, and it gives you more leverage to turn things. But before you try to take off these brackets, put a bunch of WD-40, put a rag on the bottom under, because it's going to drop a lot of gunk and grease and dirt, so it doesn't dirty your floor. And let it sit there and do its thing. Use a larger socket wrench for that. And then what I ended up doing, the way that I was absolutely able to take it off, and I wish I had tried it sooner, I actually used a 2x4. And what I did was I put the socket wrench over the bolt, and I put the 2x4 over. Let's say if this needed to go down, then I would put the 2x4 above and put it and wedge it under the car, and then on the other side put weight on it and press the whole thing down. And that worked really, really well. Likewise, if this is supposed to turn to the right, in this particular case that is the case, right? What you would do is put the 2x4 under here and put the rest of the other end under the car, and then lift the 2x4 on the other end, and you could turn the entire thing. I didn't see anyone mention that on YouTube at all. I tried methods, 3 different methods that no one has ever, that I've seen, were mentioned at all, after watching a lot of videos on how to loosen calipers and remove rotors and that sort of thing. But the 2x4 method works excellent, and so does the jack stand method. If you have a second jack stand, you could use that. If you don't buy it, because you could just use a 2x4 method. You might even have one in your garage, or you can borrow it from somewhere. If not, you can buy it for a couple of bucks. So just a tip there on some things that I definitely learned and I would use if I ever had to remove rotors on any car myself. But with that being said, let's jump to the next step. So here are the caliper bolts, the caliper bracket bolts that I was mentioning. I just wanted to include it in the video so you know what they look like. And there's 2 of these. There's that one, and there's one right below it. And those are super, super tight. And again, just use the 2x4 method with a socket wrench, with ideally a 1/2-inch drive. So it's a thicker, stronger socket wrench. that allows you to have more leverage, and then you could use that to loosen these after you let it sit there with WD-40 or any type of lubricant and rust remover type of liquid like that. So with that said, let's jump to the next step. Okay, so let me show you what I'm doing. Earlier I mentioned that we could remove the brake pad from the cylinder, the brake piston I should say, and what I did was I put it back on so you can see how this is done. In this particular case, the cylinder was pretty far back. I could probably put the new brakes on, maybe, but in the case that your cylinder, or your piston I should say, is sticking out at all, what you do is put the clamp like that, and also resting it on this on the rotor, and this area right here, as I mentioned earlier, allows you to do this a little bit more easily, since you're not trying to hold up the weight of this entire piece while trying to do this. So as you can see how I did it here, I put this end on the front of the brake pad and this end on the back of it, and then you just go tightening, right? You go tightening until the piston is all the way back, right? And what that's going to allow you to do is take out the brakes a little bit easier, and then put in the new ones, right? Because I'll show you right now. We'll go ahead and loosen it now that it's been pushed all the way back. What this will allow you to do, my gloves are all shredded. So what that allows you to do is push this piston all the way back, all the way to the back, so you have more space later when you're putting on the new brake pads that are much thicker. You're going to need more space, so you want this round piston to be pushed all the way back so you can put in the new brakes and the caliper, and then and install everything the way it was before. Okay, so what we want to do now is go ahead and put on the new brake pads. So you can see here, this is the new one, completely brand new. And one thing I want to mention too, I noticed, if you can see here, so this is the old one that I just took off. You can see how that one doesn't have a line here, a space in the middle. I don't know if that has anything to do with the problem that I was having with the vibration, not the vibrations, but I should say the squealing, where it would squeal probably like I was maybe going 2-3 miles an hour. Like once I was almost completely to a stop, that's the only time that it would squeal, when I was braking at 1 or 2, 3 miles an hour, about to come to a complete stop. And I noticed that this one here has that space in the middle, right? And from what I understand, the way these things work, obviously you're going to get some vibration as you're hitting the brakes. And it's possible that because these have a different shape or have the space in the middle, that maybe it vibrates at a different frequency that's not audible, or it just doesn't create any squealing. I don't know if that's the case. It may or may not help, but just something I did realize. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the OEM ones might have the space in the middle, but don't quote me on that. But essentially what you're going to want to do is add the new, install the new brake pads, right? Let's grab the, let me just make sure this goes this way, right? Oh, this is the old one. Where did I just put the new one at? Did it just get stolen from me? Okay, here it is. So, I just want to make sure that this is the way that it goes back here. Okay, so what we're going to do is install this again in here. So what we're going to do, see how you have these 3 prongs? These prongs are going to go inside of the brake cylinder like so. Make sure it goes in properly and you don't bend the prongs, right? You don't want to do that. So make sure it's going in the right way before you force it. Okay, now we're going to put this back on here. Okay, there you go. That went on pretty easily. Well, so what we're going to do before I forget, we're going to add some brake paste to the back of the brake pad. So actually we're going to take this off before I forget. Almost forgot. We're going to take this off. Let's put this back here really quickly. And we're going to put some brake paste. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab some of the brake paste right here. I'm actually going to use the one that came with the brake pads themselves instead of the other one that I got, just to finish this off. What we're going to do is actually put it a little bit right here on the edges and on the back. And on this slide right here, this is where the brakes slide back and forth in this area. And I took off my gloves because they just tore all up. And my hands started getting dirty anyway now that they have holes and tears in them. So much for trying to keep my hands somewhat clean. So we'll just add some of that brake paste there. And we'll just do, we'll do that on the other side as well. There you go. Okay, so we'll do that on the other side as well, and I'll show you what the next step is. Alright guys, as you can see, I have put back the caliper and everything back together in the way that we took it off, put the brake pads inside, put the caliper back on, and I put the 2 bolts in. Just remember that, keep in mind that when you're putting in the 2 bolts in the back, to go pushing towards you and wiggling as you're turning and tightening, so that you make sure that it's seated properly, so that the bolts don't tighten in a weird way and they're not actually seated the way they're supposed to, and you think they're tight but they're not. So make sure they go all the way in, and you're confident that they're super tight and they're seated properly and they're perfectly straight. Don't forget to put your 2 caps back on so that none of that rusts. If you decide to put some lubricant on the bolts, that would be the time to do it, so that they don't seize up in the future in the case that you need to take this off again in a couple of years or whatnot. That would be a good time to do it. The next thing to keep in mind is once you do this side and the other side, or you're done completely with your brakes, what you want to do is put back your cap on your oil tank that you the cap that you removed in the compartment under your hood, and you should be good to go. Something that's really important though is that once you put the wheel back on, you close everything, you're completely done, you turn on the car and then you pump your brakes, because right now your brake calipers are completely open. So if you press your brakes, you're just going to close this much because you open them completely. So you close the caliper by pumping your brakes. When you turn the car back on, pump your brakes until you feel it nice and tight, so that the caliper presses around your brakes and puts them around your rotor, so that you're good to go. That's important because that's not safe if you're trying to drive and then you go to press the brakes and nothing happens, especially if you change your brake pads and your rotors in the front and back all at once. Then none of your brakes are going to work. But if you just do the front ones, then at least the rear ones would work and, you know, save you, hopefully. So don't let that happen. Just turn on the car when you're done and pump your brakes until you feel it nice and tight and feel pressure under your foot, and you're good to go. Another thing to mention as well, anytime that you're going to buy any part for your car, any car, but especially this car, because I find that BMW has made things very complex by making minute changes to parts based off of the year or the make and model, or I should say the model of the car, and packages that it comes with. So for example, these brakes right here are for this particular model. So I have the luxury model, and I think it's the same as the base model. But if you have the sport package, or if you have sport brakes or anything like that, the brakes are going to be different, right? So again, this is how you install the brakes and the rotors on a 2012 F30 328i luxury edition. I believe the base model is the same, but don't quote me on that. I'm going to put 2 websites in the description for you. One of them you guys might know of, but I think a lot of you guys won't. And I think another one might be one that most of you guys don't know about. And I found that out of necessity. Luckily I did, because the first site that I'm going to mention didn't have the OEM number or manufacturer number for my brakes, so I wasn't able to find a replacement. They only had the ones based off of the sport packages or the sport brakes, which I do not have, right? So make sure that you check out these two websites. So the first one is realoem.com. You type in your make and model and year and that sort of thing. Make sure you select the right car, and then you can see all the parts that you need and then the OEM numbers. And then if you want to find the exact same one or aftermarket ones, you always go by the OEM number. Don't go by pictures because they vary slightly, the parts vary slightly, so you'll probably end up picking the wrong thing. And don't always trust descriptions. Again, you have to go by the OEM number so you can find the right part that you need specifically for your car. The second one is ETK. Let me just double check that right here. Yeah, it's etkbmw.com. That one I prefer. It's a little bit more visual. I think it has a better visual interface, and that's the site that showed me the OEM number of my brakes, which might be yours as well if you're watching this video. So I would recommend that website highly, and then you can find what you need. That's how I found the Akabono ones, and that they were replacements for the OEM of the original ones. So you can choose to get the original brakes if you like. They're a little bit more expensive, and I believe those are semi-metallics, so they're gonna throw, you know, some brake dust. You probably have an idea if you have those installed and have had those installed up until now. But the ceramics are obviously the best ones for the least brake dust, and that's what I absolutely wanted. Also, if you're checking on Amazon for parts, don't trust Amazon and their feature that tells you whether the part fits your vehicle or not. That's not accurate at all. It could say it doesn't fit and it might fit, and it could say that it does fit and it might not fit. My previous car, I had a Mazda 3, and I bought, I believe, headlights or was fog lights, and Amazon said they fit, and of course they didn't fit. So just a tip there as well, always go by the OEM numbers so you can find parts that are designed to replace the OEM part. I can't trust that highly, so you don't buy parts and waste money and then have to deal with returns or buying another set of stuff and wasting money. So that's absolutely huge. Again, I'll put a picture so you can see the difference between the front brakes or the front wheels and the rear wheels, so you can see the difference in ceramic and the semi-metallic brakes. And what I'll do is I'll put a notation in the video. Of course, as of the making of this video, I just installed these brakes, so I don't know, I don't have experience with them specifically just yet. So I'll put a notation after a month or two and make sure that they're not squealing and or not causing any problems or anything like that. And then I'll put a notation so you know, for anyone watching the video at that point, know whether I recommend those or not, or these I should say. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have an issue with them. Again, these are Akabonos, and these are just so that you know, since I have the box right here, you can see it. These are EUR 1561As. That's the exact model number of these right here. And I'll put the links to the description for everything that I've used. The brakes, the brake pads, the rotors, the set of hex wrenches and that sort of thing. Anything that's going to be useful for you, because my goal is that you watch this video and you don't need anything else, because I went through a lot of headache dealing with this stuff, and it took me a long time to get everything set up, and now it's a breeze. And I highly recommend, if you're handy, do the job yourself. You'll save yourself a ton of money, and then you'll realize that because it's not that big of a deal, that you can actually do this on any other car that you own and save yourself money in the long run as well. So me personally, I would never have another shop change brakes or rotors, just because they charge a lot more for labor, and it's just not that difficult. You need the right tools, and you can do that inside of a garage or anything like that, and you should be set. What's up, guys? Hope you got something out of that. Apologize for the super long video, the longest video I've ever done. I just wanted to include all the stuff that I thought was super important, that's going to help you out, save you a lot of frustration and time and money. So I wanted to include all that in the video. Hope the details help you out a bit. Also, I apologize, I'm not going to be able to add in the pictures with the front and back tires, so you can see the difference in brake dust between ceramic and semi-metallic. I actually ended up washing the car right afterwards. I forgot to take pictures. So, and obviously the whole point of that was to stop the brake dust, so I probably won't be able to take pictures of that again anyway, since the front and the back now are both ceramic brakes. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, add it below in the comment section. I'm going to add in all the links, as I mentioned, to everything that I've used and the brakes and stuff that I recommend that you use. And I'm actually going to do another video right now on how to spray or paint the top of your hood on your vehicle. Do a review product on a paint spray that I purchased. So I have other videos on how to do certain things to your car as well if you own a BMW. If you want to check those out on my channel. But with that said, I hope you guys got something out of that, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.